Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Go Talk with Marcus, powered by Poddex, fueled by Goat Fuel. Once again, joining me, a habitual pain in my side, Mr. Justin Marvel. How's it going, man? How you feeling?
I'm feeling good because that's why I live for, to be a pain in your side. Everyone has goals in life, and that's my goal. So, if you're bringing me on for that, I've accomplished my goal in life.
Yikes. The fact that it's your goal to be a habitual pain in my side, my guy, is quite unacceptable, to say the least. We've got a good show for you today. We're going to try to make this very short and quick because we got 3 playoff games ahead tonight. Heat at Hawks at 7 o'clock.
I think there are 4 playoff games.
There might be 4. Heat at Hawks, Bucks at Bulls, Suns at Pelicans. I can't think of the last one off the top of my head right now. Let's start, though, by talking about the Utah Jazz and the Dallas Mavericks, whose next game is tomorrow. Somehow, without Luka Doncic, the Dallas Mavericks are leading this series 2-1. And the Jazz are proving to me what I said to Justin a couple months ago about how they are just the ultimate frontrunners. Justin, 1, are you surprised that the Jazz are down 2-1 in this series? And then 2, should they lose this series, what's next for Donovan Mitchell and his future with Utah?
I'm extremely surprised that they are indeed down in this series. Going into it, if Luka were healthy, I would have picked the Mavericks to win the series. But as we know, Luka has not played in any of the 3 games so far. And for them, to have absolutely no clue how to stop somebody like Jalen Brunson, a very small guard, it's just really befuddling to me. And it's supposed to be at a defensive end that the Jazz make their mark. But again, you have a problem with, their defensive stalwart in Rudy Gobert. Yes, stunning to me. Let's be honest, though, the series is not over. As much as there's optimism that Luka Doncic will eventually play in the series, there's still, a minimum of 2 more games left to play. Utah can still get their way back in this series. Again, they're only down a game. But, yeah, it's very, very shocking to me because at the end of the day, when you look at all the teams that are in the playoffs, if there is one team that is relying on one player, it is Dallas with Luka. Luka is the engine that makes everything go. Like, you've heard coaches on the outside and players on the outside complain about what Dallas does because everything funnels through Luka Doncic. So for the Jazz to have problems with this Dallas team minus Luka Doncic is really concerning. To answer the second part of your question, though, were the Jazz to lose, what happens? I think it is all justification to blow it up. And I don't know whether it'll be first Donovan Mitchell to ask for a trade, but I think, like, Utah, again, we talk about this all the time. Places like Utah, they are not free agent destinations. So you're not going to attract anyone to come there via, free agency. So it means you're going to have to trade your assets if you intend to keep Donovan Mitchell. The issue is the albatross of a contract that is Rudy Gobert. I think he's making $41 million a year on that massive $200 million contract. He is the guy that you're going to have to trade. Who is exactly going to want Rudy Gobert at that much money? And I think he has like 3 or 4 more years left on that deal. Like, that's the biggest asset you have, except for somebody like Jordan Clarkson again. And I don't know if you trade that, what that nets, but you're going to have to find more scoring. And also on top of that, Mike Conley also makes a ton of money, over $30 million as well. Like, these are some very, very big high-priced contracts that you're going to have to move if to improve this team. And I don't know who is taking on these players at that price.
This series has done me a lot of favors, right? I joke sometimes, but I mean it seriously. Like, I have had the pleasure, and actually I didn't text Justin a year ago. A couple days ago was my first guest appearance. It was on Justin's show. It was a draft special. It was last year, April 17th. Since I've known Justin, right, and I mean this halfway jokingly, Justin has always, in a way, given me like this constant ugh, because I'm a young buck, and he's always got the history thing on his side, and he thinks He thinks some of the things he's like, get out of here with that young jibber jabber Gen Z nonsense. That's fine. I completely understand. I've been telling Justin for as long as I've known Justin that Rudy Gobert is a defensive liability, and Rudy Gobert has proven to be just that. Like, he's also an offensive liability, but we all knew that because so far through 3 games, Rudy Gobert has posted 5 points, 8 points, and 15 points. That's unacceptable. And I saw people on Twitter and all those things comment about the fact that, oh, it's because Donovan Mitchell doesn't feed them the ball. No, Rudy Gobert sucks. Rudy Gobert is not an asset to you offensively. He's doing so far in this series what he gets paid to do. He's not doing a good job of it, but he's doing it, which is rebound the ball, protect the rim. He's not doing a good job of that. Jalen Brunson, and I'll get into this a little bit later too when we get to Nikola Jokic, and that'll be towards the end of the show, and that's why Justin's on this show. Jalen Brunson, so far through 3 games, all 3 of these games, both individually and collectively, have been some of the best playoff basketball of his career, but also like these have individually been 3 of the best some of the best game by game performances we've seen from one individual player in the playoffs. Like, if you look at how everybody's performing across the league right now in the playoffs, like you have Jason Tatum, who I think has been the best player in the playoffs so far to this point. Jordan Poole's on that list as well, and we'll get to him in a little bit as well. But like Jalen Brunson's up there as like one of the 5 guys that have really been playing phenomenally. He dropped 41 in game 2, and that led them to get that win to tie it up going home back to Dallas. And then he dropped 31 in game 3 to give them the 2-1 lead. Like, say what you want about, whether or not a player is good or not. Like, Jalen Brunson just reminding you that, like, at any given night, any player in the NBA can go off. And what's incredible about this series is last week when German Steezy were on the show, we were talking about, and I said I had the Mavericks in 6. We were talking about the potential that if this series gets out of hand, Luka doesn't play at all. Now what you have is not only is this series not out of hand, but you're really giving Luka more time to rest anyway, because it doesn't seem like the Mavericks need Luka to win this series. Now, I'm not saying that they can win this series without him, because they will probably it would be in the Mavericks' best interest to get Luka back on the court at 100% as soon as possible to lock this in and move on to the second round. But if you look at how the Mavericks have been playing basketball over the last 3 games of this series, they don't look like they need Luka. Like, this is a basketball team that has been looking incredible. And I think when you look at the Utah Jazz, the one thing that's always puzzled me, especially importantly with this series, Rudy Gobert is not an offensive threat. But the Mavericks don't really have a big man. Like, they've got Maxi Kleber and they've got Boban Marjanovic, but they don't really have a big man that can dominate and control the paint offensively and keep Rudy Gobert from scoring. Why isn't Rudy Gobert been the focal point of this offensive attack through 3 games? Like, I understand the ball has to go through Donovan Mitchell, and he's done well. He's dropped, I think, 32, 34, and 32 again, something like that over these first 3 games. But Rudy Gobert, whether he's an offensive threat or not, Rudy Gobert can handle Maxi Kleber down low, I suppose, given his length. And he should be able to fare relatively well against Boban Marjanovic as well. Like, while I understand why you don't want the ball in Rudy Gobert's hand is because he's not the most reliable guy offensively, that still has to be a point of attack when you know that the Mavericks are going to be fishing for points because their guy's not there. Like, kudos to the Mavericks for being able to get the job done without Luka and give Luka more time to rest. It's not looking like right now this is going to be a situation like we saw with KD a couple years ago in the finals and some other players where, like, they're going to be rushing Luka back because they look fine without him. As far as Donovan Mitchell goes, Donovan Mitchell needs to go. Like, this is not going to be a situation, I think, where Donovan Mitchell can win a championship. I never thought that this was going to be a situation where Donovan Mitchell can win a championship. The Utah Jazz are a phenomenal regular season basketball team. Like, we saw that last season. We saw that the season before that. We saw that the season before that. Like, from the second that Donovan Mitchell has kind of hit his stride and hit his prime as an NBA basketball player, the Utah Jazz have been winning consistently in the regular season. But as we all know, the playoffs are all about matchups. And so far, the Utah Jazz have just continued to be getting outclassed, outcoached, outplayed, out-executed against whoever is on the other side of the court from them over the course of a 7-game series. And it's unfortunate in a way because this is a basketball team with a guy in Donovan Mitchell who I think can be the number 1 option on a championship caliber basketball team. And for some reason, this just isn't the case. Maybe he's not a bona fide guy, and maybe he's not there right now, but he definitely has the potential of being a number 1 scoring option on a championship team. This is if there is any bigger letdown in this first slate of playoff series, the Utah Jazz losing this series with Luka Doncic having missed now 3 games, and they potentially lose this series, that would absolutely be the biggest letdown of this series, because that's just unacceptable. You don't lose a playoff series against a team who doesn't have their best player for at least half of it.
The thing is, I like Donovan Mitchell to an extent, but like he can't run away from the blame here. Huh? While
Yeah.
the pure numbers look great, the reality is he's not scoring efficiently. And I've always had a problem with teams that their best player is a small guard, because that's what Donovan Mitchell is. He's only 6'3". Like in today's NBA, it's kind of hard unless your name's Steph, who has unlimited range. Like you're really not going to win with your best player being a very small guard. Like, like I'm not sure that Utah is built to win an NBA title. Sure, they have the big man there to protect the rim, and they shoot a lot of threes. But like when those threes are not dropping, and you bottle up a small guard like Donovan Mitchell, because it's easy to defend players like Donovan Mitchell who are not, don't have the size of a Jason Tatum, a Kawhi Leonard, a Paul George, and it can go on and on and on. Bigger wing players. Like, what else are you doing? Like, your next best player is likely Jordan Clarkson, who only scores for himself. And this is no shot at Jordan Clarkson, but it's just to talk about his limitations. I don't know this team is built to win in the postseason. And again, this is no shot at any of the players there. It's just how it is constructed. And the reality of the situation is they are based in Utah, and no one is going to Utah. And I think this team, as constructed, has reached its, is maxed out. And the reality, as I talked about earlier, I don't know what moves you can make to get this team to be better than it is.
Look, at this point, I think the Dallas Mavericks, if they win tomorrow, they're going to win the series. And I already had the Mavericks winning the series because I thought that they would do exactly this. I didn't have the Mavericks being up 2-1 at this point, but I did have the Mavericks keeping it close. I thought they would be down 2-1 and Luka would have returned in tomorrow's game. But to be going into game 4 of this series up 2-1 with a chance to take a commanding 3-1 lead without the best player on your team and the best player under 25 having stepped foot on the court is great. Because, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too, like you look at who they could potentially be looking at. The Phoenix Suns, their road out of the first round has gotten a little bit tougher. I still think the Suns will make it out because I think without Devin Booker, they're still head and shoulders better offensively, defensively, well coach, all that stuff. And we know that than the New Orleans Pelicans. But now this, especially given what we've seen from the Pelicans in game 2, like this series as with the Suns and the Pelicans has definitely turned into a lot more of a dogfight than maybe any of us expected, and definitely than maybe more than Justin, you or so far comfortable with. Like that is a series that, depending on how long Devin Booker is out, could very well linger to 7 games. And if the Mavericks can wrap this series up against the Jazz as quickly as possible and give Luka even more time to rest, that makes that second round series, whether it's against the Pelicans or the Suns, even more winnable, I think, for the Mavericks in the long run. I obviously think their best odds of getting out into the Western Conference Finals is the Pelicans. But if you got a Luka Doncic who hasn't played 3 games, who might not even have to play in this series at all, just continue to get healthy, with the Suns who are, should they make it out of this round, which I think they will, are going to be worn and torn from having to make up for the absence of Devin Booker, like that plays a big role in playoff basketball. So, like, kudos to the Mavericks. I hope they win tomorrow because at this point, it's like I don't even know if the Jazz have what it takes to come back from down 2-1, and being down 2-1 isn't an insurmountable lead by any stretch of the imagination. But like, if you can't get the job done without against a team whose best player isn't there, let's say Luka comes back in game 4. Are we just going to think now that Luka's back in the lineup for the Mavericks that now all of a sudden the Jazz are going to start rattling off victories, which they're going to now need 3 of the next 5 to like it's not looking good for Utah, and I hate to say I told you so because I never want to prey on anybody's downfall, but like I told you so. Like I think well, not you, Justin, because you have this false sense of hope and security for every team except for teams your own. But like I think you could have seen this coming from a mile away with just the collapse of the Utah Jazz as far as just not being built, as you said, to play in the playoffs. This just isn't a good look.
As you said, they still have time, but no, it's not a good look. And yeah.
So the Jazz have been a pretty overhyped regular season team, and for some reason, after making the playoffs for the first time in for however long, the Minnesota Timberwolves have seemed to bought into their own hype a lot. Now, don't get me wrong, right? You should always bet on yourself. But the Minnesota Timberwolves, I think, have just taken betting to yourself to a whole nother level. They're down 2-1. They're down 2-1 to the Grizzlies, and last night was especially funny to me because we all know how I felt about Karl Anthony Towns. After he was mic'd up as saying that we in Minnesota now, basically saying that there's no reason why they shouldn't win this game, the Timberwolves didn't score a bucket for a very long time. More importantly and more embarrassing, the Minnesota Timberwolves gave up two, not one, but two 20-plus point leads to ultimately lose this game 3 to the Memphis Grizzlies. Has Karl Anthony Towns bought too much of his own stock at this point in his career?
Of course, I don't want to rip on a young man. He's an extremely talented person. But I have a partner, my Larry, and we always talk about Karl Anthony Towns. He likes him. But I've always told him, I think if anyone embodies empty stats, it's Karl Anthony Towns. And the problem with him is that his talent, his stats just don't impact on winning. Like, first, he's like bad defensively. If you think Rudy Gobert is a defensive liability, at least Rudy Gobert rebounds and protects paint. Karl Anthony Towns is a good rebounder, but like he is a minus on defense. Karl Anthony Towns does not help anyone or make anyone around him better. And I mean, beyond this year, like Karl Anthony Towns has only been in the playoffs once before, and that was when Jimmy Butler was there. So I need not say anymore. And then we all know about his infamous exit. And part of that is to do, again, with whatever you want to call it, whether it's lack of toughness, lack of mental strength. That's partly on Karl Anthony Towns. I have a problem with somebody his size settling for so many threes. I have a problem somebody his size starting his post-ups just inside the arc or by the free throw line. I have a problem somebody his size taking 7 shot attempts in game 3 at home. I have a problem somebody his size not understanding the gravitas of the situation, being up 20 or more than 20 twice and finding himself in foul trouble throughout the entire game 3 in front of your own home crowd. I stay away from knocking Anthony Edwards because he's young. He's only his second year. I stay away from D'Angelo Russell because, I mean, they're around the same age. But again, this is not their team. This is Karl Anthony Towns. And to be in foul trouble, your first game back home, taking 7 shot attempts or so, probably even less, doing is just not good enough. And part of this is also the coaching. Like, I am trying to be a lot less critical of players, but what I saw from Minnesota was not smart basketball. It just was not smart basketball on either end of the floor. And there is no reason why you should give up a 26-point lead, far less 2 leads of more than 20 points to a team as young as the Memphis Grizzlies. This is unacceptable. But again, Jimmy Butler warned us about the talent that is Karl Anthony Towns, who is not strong enough, whether physically and also mentally. Like, this is unacceptable. I always had Memphis to win this series. I just would not expect Minnesota at home to give up 2 leads of 20-plus points.
Here's my beef. And I think this is what's kind of the icing on the cake. We've seen in the course of sports in general, people buy into their own stock, whether they're good or whether they're not. Like we just spent a couple months ago, most of the sports world, we all just spent much of that time a couple months ago leading to the Super Bowl trolling Eli Apple because he was talking like he was the second coming of prime time, as if he hasn't been on 5 or 6 teams in the last 4 years and has like 3 interceptions to show for it altogether. Like, people are going to buy into their own hype. Karl Anthony Towns, after fouling out of the play-in game with 7 minutes to go, followed that up with a phenomenal game 1, 29 points in the win. He dropped 15 points, I think, in game 2. He had 4 points in a home playoff game in game 3. Jaren Jackson Jr. has struggled in this series. I don't know what's going on with the Triple J, but like, he struggled, and I thought that Jaren Jackson Jr. was going to dominate Cat. Like, Jaren Jackson Jr. has struggled in this game. He had 6 points in game 3. He had 16 points in game 2. He had 12 points in game 1. He hasn't played his best basketball. Karl Anthony Towns has played even worse. Now, I disagree with you slightly on the fact of whose team this is, because I think, bar none, this is Anthony Edwards' team. I think that it is undisputed that Anthony Edwards is the best player on this team at this point, and as long as Anthony Edwards plays well, the Timberwolves have a good shot of winning basketball games. Here's the issue. The issue is that while Anthony Edwards is the best player on the court, because he's so young, it doesn't seem like Anthony Edwards to this point in his career has become the vocal leader that a lot of other teams have, right? Like, the Warriors have Draymond, and even though he doesn't really get that much playing time, like the Heat have Udonis Haslem. Like there are teams across the league that have, the undisputed best player on the team, and then they also have the vocal leader, and sometimes those things intertwine. The Karl Anthony Towns is not a leader of men. It should be apparent at this point. And I know that both of these teams are young, but Cat, if you're gonna talk the talk, you have to walk the walk. And he hasn't done that. He has consistently shrunk over the course of the playoffs, with the exception of one game when the going really gets tough. Like, it's cool that you're in the playoffs. That's great. But now, even though no one thinks you are going to, the goal now should be to make a run at the championship. No one thinks the Timberwolves are going to win the championship, of course. But you have to still play competitive basketball. You can't sit around and tell us that you're the greatest shooting big man of all time, and then give me 4 points, in game 3 of a playoff game. When it's tied, and we know that when series are tied going into game 3, that's a pivotal game. That could potentially be the series-ending game, depending on how the rest of the series pans out. Like, it's one thing to buy too much into your own stock and then back it up on the court or on the field or whatever it is you do, but you can't do all the talking and then not back it up. And Cat has consistently not backed it up. Like, he's not playing good basketball at all, and it's glaringly obvious that he's not playing good basketball. Like, it's not like a situation, say like in Brooklyn right now, where both KD and Kyrie have both dropped at least 25 points in both of these 2 playoff games, but they're shooting inefficiently. Like, those are empty stats. But Cat's stats are so empty that they're barely on the box score. Like, that's not good. That if Justin, you think this is his team, I think it's Anthony Edwards' team. Regardless of that, like, if you are making yourself this face of the franchise, and if you are making yourself the guy on this team, if that's how you're portraying yourself, you have to show that in the box. I should look at this game and be like, man, Cat had an impact on this game, but they lost. That's different. If Cat's going out there being the guy that he says that he is, and they're losing this series, that's a completely different conversation. But you're talking one way, and then you're playing another. He's playing scared basketball. Like, at its finest, he's playing scared basketball, and that's not a good recipe for success. And you're right. Like, all this is doing right now, all Cat is doing right now is proving Jimmy Butler right. Is making every point that Jimmy Butler made before he left Minnesota, every single point that he's outlined, Cat is simply proving exactly everything that Jimmy Butler was saying a couple years ago. So, like, Cat should learn to shut up and produce on the court before he starts doing all the yapping. Like, Pat Bev is annoying. Right? He is a professional pest, and he does all the talking. But he does what he gets paid to do, and he does it really well. Like, I joke and I say that I've never seen Pat Bev take a shot, because, quite frankly, I haven't. A lot of that has to do with the fact that I don't watch Minnesota Timberwolves basketball. But Pat Bev shows up when he needs to. One of the reasons why the Timberwolves are even in this position right now is because Patrick Beverley played the best 7-minute stretch of basketball in his life on the defensive end of the ball against the Clippers in the first playing game. That's how they got there. Like, Pat Bev has shown up. We saw Anthony Edwards in game 1 show up. We're seeing D'Angelo Russell be very, very consistent with what he's doing. Kat, you're one of the 3 best players on this basketball team, and you've given me nothing outside of a 29-point game in game 1. You've given me nothing in game 2, and you disappeared in game 3 on your home floor. On your home floor, and you're saying we in Minnesota now, and it means nothing because you're doing all the talking, but your team gave up 2 20-point leads. That's unacceptable, and I don't really know.
I
don't really know
wonder,
where else to go at this point with Karl Anthony Towns.
I wonder if the talking is for himself more so than anyone else. I wonder if it is to hype up his own self, because he doesn't have on the floor. He doesn't have that kind of personality. So it makes me wonder, because I myself do that, talk up myself to make sure that I am, G'd up for whatever I'm going to do. So I wonder if it's that is more not against opponents, more so than to get himself ready. But yeah, it's a bad look. I'll leave it at that. It's a bad look.
All right, for the sake of my sanity and my blood pressure, I'm not going to continue to sit here and waste my time talking about Karl Anthony Towns. Let's get to part 1 of the reason why Mr. Justin Marvel is here, because Justin Marvel has said some choice words about Devin Booker and his Phoenix Suns that I particularly disagree with, and we'll get to that in a second. But Devin Booker is likely going to miss the rest of this series against New Orleans Pelicans, as I mentioned earlier, due to injury. On the other side of things, the other half of the NBA Finals last season, Khris Middleton is going to miss at least a month, I think, of basketball because he has a sprained MCL, something around there. So the Milwaukee Bucks are without their closer, and the Phoenix Suns are without one of their closers, and who Justin believes is the best player on the basketball team. 2-part question: which team is in more trouble? Is it Phoenix or Milwaukee? And can they go as far as they went last season without Khris Middleton and Devin Booker, respectively, playing basketball?
The first team, right, or the first question, sorry. I was going back and forth on this, right? And initially I wanted to lean towards saying Milwaukee was going to be in more trouble because of the path that each respective team has, and especially Khris Middleton's injury, like an MCL sprain, is more a lean towards MCL sprain being more troublesome than a hamstring. The thing with the hamstrings is that they get better with rest, and that's the only thing that helps with hamstrings, rest. MCL sprains are typically more troublesome, and as you noted, he's likely going to be out a month. And, Milwaukee is likely going to have to face Boston at this point in the second round series, which is more troublesome or a better opponent in my estimation than Dallas. The problem here, the reason why I'm going to lean towards my Phoenix Suns having, being in more trouble, is because the reality situation is one team still has Giannis. Like when you look, like when you say all said and done, whether you think Devin Booker or Chris Paul is the best player in the Phoenix Suns, Giannis is the best player, not just in the situation. For me, I think Giannis is the best player in the NBA. If not, at least like the second or third best, no lower than that. He is still playing games. And first thing, he's playing the Chicago Bulls. In my estimation, a very overhyped team, because this is a team that beat everyone that they're supposed to beat. But the moment that they have to play somebody with above 500 record or at least a top 4 seed, I think Chicago on the season is winless against all of those teams. Like completely winless. And it is so bad. Chicago, for the first time, I think in 15 or 16 games, finally beat Giannis. Like, they had to beat the Bucks, be prayer without Giannis. So, as much as Khris Middleton is indeed their closer, I have seen there's a stretch of games when Milwaukee, towards the end of the season, I think they beat Philadelphia, they beat Miami, and then they beat Chicago. There's a 3-game, 4-game stretch. And I saw what Drew Holiday was doing at the end of those games. Not only was he locking down players at one end, but then going and finishing out games at the other. Milwaukee is not going to get back to the finals without Khris Middleton. There's no ifs, ands, or buts in my estimation. I do not see that happening. Like he is that important to the team. You've heard me tell you and Germ that over and over again. Khris Middleton is a very integral part of what that team does. But the Milwaukee Bucks still have Giannis Antetokounmpo. I looked at Phoenix Suns' record without Devin Booker this season. It is still above 500, 2 games above 500 at 8-6. But the last 5 games that they had to play without Devin Booker, not including this playoff loss, I think they were 1-4 in those last 5 games without Devin Booker. 3 of those losses, right, in a stretch came against Sacramento, OKC, and Los Angeles Clippers. Those are bad losses. And then you saw the second half against the New Orleans Pelicans without Devin Booker. They are 11-5 this season without CP3. You could take that for whatever it's worth. And I'm not here to argue who is better than who, but it is clear to me that they feel the loss of Devin Booker more than Chris Paul. And for the simple fact that as great as Chris Paul is in terms of facilitating, Devin Booker does a bit more because he is, their number one scoring option. He is their secondary playmaker because even when Cam Payne comes on the court to score. Cam Payne does not come on the court to facilitate. The facilitators on that squad are Chris Paul and Devin Booker. That's how it goes. I think the Suns will indeed get past New Orleans without Devin Booker. Potentially, maybe because of how great they are defensively, maybe they can get past Dallas. Maybe even if Luka Doncic plays, I put a big maybe. I do not see the Suns beating the Grizzlies and or the Warriors in a Western Conference Finals matchup without Devin Booker. And I know he's only supposed to miss 2 to 3 weeks, and he did play with this injury in the NBA Finals. I don't think the Suns are good enough when rosters get shortened and possessions mean so much more that they can beat the Grizzlies or the Warriors without Devin Booker. So I'm going to see both teams need those 2 players back. I don't see both of them getting to the finals or either of them getting to the finals without either player.
I think the Suns can get to the finals without Devin Booker. The Bucks cannot get to the finals without Khris Middleton, and it's not even close. I don't always have the most positive opinions on the Milwaukee Bucks. We know that. We know that. But if you look at just the teams around Milwaukee, outside of Brooklyn and Atlanta, who probably won't make it out of the first round anyway, but there's still hope for both teams. A little bit, but there's still some.
You mean there's hope for they're the same hole, so yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Or not Miami. I meant to say outside of Brooklyn and Atlanta. My bad. They are on the same hole.
I have no hope for Atlanta in my estimation, but
I have no hope for Atlanta either. But Trae Young pulls more rabbits out of the hat than the great Houdini. So who knows, right? The Heat are a great defensive basketball team. The 76ers with Matisse Thybulle are a great defensive basketball team. We are literally seeing the Celtics with our own eyes lock down one of the most skilled duos of all time, 2 of the most skilled players of all time in Kevin Durant and Kyrie in their series. That's a really solid defensive basketball team. Those you're going to have to go through at least 2 of those teams to make it to the finals. I do not know I don't know. I know for sure the Bucks can't make it to the finals without Khris Middleton. Why? Because we've seen this movie before. We've seen the Milwaukee Bucks go up against teams that had enough bodies to throw at you consistently at Giannis, force other guys to get their shots, and it didn't work. Namely, the Toronto Raptors in 2019 in the Eastern Conference semifinals. We saw that. And while Giannis put up numbers, they were empty stats, and the Bucks ultimately got sent home. We saw when Giannis, even though it was Giannis, we saw when Giannis went down in the bubble with his injury, while the Bucks did win a game and look better at playing basketball, you can make the argument, they still struggled to find open shots against solid defensive teams. This is not a basketball team that can flourish without Giannis and Khris Middleton being on the floor, because outside of Khris Middleton, they don't have a shot creator, a legitimate shot creator that can go get their shot, especially in the big moments. They don't have a guy that you can consistently rely on a game-to-game basis. Does Bobby Portis heat up? Absolutely. Can Brook Lopez go out there and give you 8 threes a night? Yeah, once every blue moon. Right. Drew Holiday can pour in 20 to 25 points on a good night, maybe. But as far as consistently being a guy that can get you your shot, regardless of what's going on with Giannis or the other players on the team, there's no one else that can do that outside of Khris Middleton. The road to the finals is much tougher, I think, in the East because all of those teams are outside of Brooklyn and Atlanta. All of those teams you have to potentially deal with, and even the Raptors to a certain degree. All of those teams that are left are really solid defensive basketball teams. In the West, it's really the complete opposite because in the West, outside of Phoenix and Memphis, there aren't really the strengths of those basketball teams aren't defense. The Warriors can play defense, don't get me wrong, but that's we all know with Steph, Clay, and now Jordan Poole on that roster, that focus is going to be offensive onslaught. The same thing can be said for Luka Doncic and the Mavericks, even though that's a one-man show. If the Jazz can pull it together, that's another one-man show. If somehow Nikola Jokic can will this team from down 3-0 and get there, that's also an offensive onslaught. And by the way, if the Suns run into Nikola Jokic, that's a buzzsaw, and Jokic will just get swept out of the playoffs anyway. So I think the Suns can hold their own in a war of offensive wits because I think that because of how great of a facilitator that Chris Paul is, and also because of how head and shoulders above the rest they are as far as playing defense, that'll be able to balance out. You're not going to win a playoff series without Khris Middleton because without a closer, this team isn't good. And we've seen what that looks like in the playoff series. So I'm going to say that the Bucks are in more trouble. Now, we have to talk about this because I don't think we've ever had a one-on-one conversation about this, and we have nothing better to do since we're on the air right now. You think that Devin Booker is the best player on the Suns? I think Chris Paul is the best player on the Suns. I think it's splitting hairs. I don't think it's that big of an issue who you say is the best player on the Suns, but I don't think I've ever told you why Chris Paul is the best player on the Suns. And it's quite simply because Chris Paul does for you things that no one else on this team can do, right? Like Devin Booker is absolutely the secondary facilitator. There's nobody on this basketball team that has the IQ that Chris Paul has. Like Chris Paul has one of the greatest IQs in the history of the sport. And this isn't the best argument, obviously, because there were a lot of improvements made on this team outside of just Chris. But just look at what the Suns looked like before and after Chris Paul got there. Like as soon as Chris Paul gets there, this team is in the finals. And say what you want about the injuries to AD and LeBron with the Lakers and the injuries to Steph and all those guys not even struggling all that. Like the fact of the matter is Chris Paul gets there, they're going to the finals, right? Chris Paul arrives in Houston. They had 2 shots to make to the finals, and it took 2 abysmal shooting nights on 2 separate occasions to keep the Rockets out of the finals 2 separate years, right? You look at what Chris Paul did in OKC. They didn't even have a chance to make it to the playoffs, and they were in the playoffs. You look at what Chris Paul did when he was drafted. No one had any hope in Charlotte when he got there, or New Orleans, when he got there. They did that. So I think that really the main reason why I think that Chris Paul is the best player on this basketball team is simply because he gives that extra sense of veteran leadership. Like, yeah, he doesn't have the ring or the awards or the accolades to go with it, but he's still a veteran leader. He can still this is still a young basketball team. Like they've got the experience now because they've been to the finals, but this is still a young basketball team. And Chris Paul is the guy that calms all this down and keeps these guys focused and honed in on what to do. I love Devin Booker. I think Devin Booker is we throw this word around so loosey-goosey nowadays, but I'll just go out there and say it because I think he is. I think Devin Booker is a superstar. I think Devin Booker is great. I think Devin Booker is a top 5 mid-range shooter in the game. Just so happens one of his teammates, Chris Paul, is also a top 5 mid-range shooter in the game today. I just think that because of what Chris Paul brings to the table, it's not that Chris Paul can't score. Is that Chris Paul knows when to turn it on and turn it off. Like the game that I think it was game 2, I think, when he just flipped the switch and took the game. No, game 1, sorry, when he just flipped the switch and took the game over in the fourth quarter. Like that is something that, if we're being completely honest, I don't think anyone else on the team can do. Like Devin Booker can obviously have a great game, but I don't know if Devin Booker can just turn it on and off the way Chris Paul does. And I think that's really the difference for me. Like Devin Booker, only player in the active player to score 70 points in a basketball game. Like we know that he can pour it on with the best of them. But Devin Booker is more of just a consistent like shooting threat, like boom, 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 boom. There aren't many instances where we look at Devin Booker and say, flip the switch. You know what I mean? Like Jason Tatum flips the switch, Jaylen Brown flips the switch, Chris Paul also flips the switch, and I think that's where I kind of give the edge to Chris Paul as far as being the best player on the team. But Devin Booker's not, as you would say, he's like 1B, right? There's nothing wrong with being a 1B. You know, there are a lot of great 1Bs in the world. You're my 1B. It all works out. You know what I mean? Like it all works out for the good. I just want you to know that Chris Paul is better than Chris Paul is the best player on the team. And it's important to me that you know that, because while you are wearing an Eric Bledsoe jersey, there's a point guard on the team right now that's the best player on the team, and it's Chris Paul.
I'm not going to say someone was crazy for saying that. I'm not even going to argue strongly, because like there are arguments to be had on both sides, and like you are correct. Before Chris Paul got there, the team was really bad, except for leading into that last season. They had the 8-0 stretch in the bubble.
Yeah.
And there's so many things to credit for, just as you mentioned, not just Chris Paul, like, the hand of Monty Williams, the addition of Jay Crowder, which I think goes by so unnoticed, the improvement of Mikal Bridges, which a lot of people may point towards Chris Paul being there. And again, like, to make your own argument for you, like, I think the leader in the league in the fourth quarter, plus minus, is indeed Chris Paul. The clutch stats, words are hard. Indeed, I think Chris Paul has the best clutch rating of everybody in the league. So there is that argument there. But again, when you look at the team all around, would you know the third and fourth best, even fifth, in terms of fourth quarter plus minus? Third is Devin Booker. I think fourth is Mikal Bridges, and fifth is Jay Crowder. They're all Suns. And, they had to play a stretch without, Chris Paul. And you saw the record. And again, this is no knock on Chris Paul. Also, as I said before, I think you were on the program, Devin Booker is going to be the first player on the league's best team in terms of record to average 25, 5-5 at least. And he averaged 26, 5-5, not to win the league MVP. And he was indeed, I think, a top 5 MVP candidate. He didn't make the finals, obviously, but a top 5 MVP or top 6 MVP candidate.
He just got a better MVP case than Nikola Jokic, so
I don't think so, but we'll get into that argument later on for sure. But again, there's a splitting here. Is like, if you want to say Chris Paul is the best player on the team, like, I have no argument with that. Just for me, for what Devin Booker does in terms of not just facilitating, but in terms of scoring, I think either man is irreplaceable. If you had to ask me right now which one I'd rather be without, I'd rather be without either. Like, the reality situation. And I do not think any team in the West had a realistic chance with a fully healthy Suns team. I know the human being that Devin Booker is, and like a lot of people like to liken other players to Kobe Bryant. I think in terms of dogged mentality, there is no other player in the league right now that reminds me more of Kobe Bryant than Devin Booker. And I know he is not going to wait until he is 100% healthy before he gets back into the season. We are going to see him. Once the Suns survive the Pelicans, we're going to see Devin Booker in this stretch. I just like the Bucks to beat the Bulls more so than anything else, because
of course, no, the Bucks will get past the Bulls, but
there is just
they don't have any
body.
body.
By the way, to strengthen your argument, though, the Bucks are like minus, like below 500 when at least one of the big three does not play. So there is that case. Like, this team is not good when they're not fully healthy, but the Bulls are.
They'll get past the Bulls, no problem. I don't care. They'll be fine because Giannis is still playing basketball, and the Bulls aren't a good defensive basketball team. Once you get past the Bulls and you're looking at potentially the Hawks, you're looking at potentially the 76ers or the Celtics,
right.
Then you're getting into a situation.
Celtics, and that'll be a tough.
That's going to be a troublesome because the beautiful thing, and I think the scary thing about the Celtics is the Celtics have been swarming the Nets, and they have 2 lethal scorers. The Bucks only have 1. Like, all of the bodies are going to be going in the direction of Giannis Antetokounmpo, and that's going to make that series very, very, very difficult. That's why I liked it. It's going to be tough. So we'll go from teams that are down an offensive weapon to one team that has definitely gained an offensive weapon through the course of the season, and he's really coming to his own this playoff series. That's one Jordan Poole with the Golden State Warriors. It looks like the Warriors have finally found their third splash brother. Draymond Green's on record as saying that it's never been it's always hard to take a team that has players from past championship success combined with players that are trying to get championship success and come together to attain that success. But the Warriors have seemingly done it so seamlessly and so easily. They are currently up 3-0 on the Denver Nuggets with your MVP Nikola Jokic, with a chance to close out the series on Sunday in Denver. How important do you think Jordan Poole is? Not for this series, because this series is just about over. How important is Jordan Poole as far as Golden State's long-term success to win a championship this season, and how impressive has he been so far against the Nuggets?
First, to answer your second question first, he's been extremely impressive. I didn't expect to see this because I have a thing against young players, because young players typically don't understand what it takes to perform in the playoffs, because like there is a noted rise in levels, like a regular season game. And I'll give you an example. Kyrie Irving spent how many other seasons before LeBron James got there outside of the playoffs in Cleveland? And he had a primetime matchup against the Chicago Bulls, his first real primetime matchup. And there's this anecdote up there. He leaned towards Mike Miller and said, "Is this what the playoffs feel like?" And Mike Miller laughed and said, "No." Like, there is that level of raised physicality. The whistle stops blowing, and you're facing a good team every single night. Like, there are no bad teams to feast on once you get in the playoffs. So I say all that to say somebody as young as Jordan Poole, what he is doing, I am very impressed. Granted, it is against a Denver team that is not known for being good on the defensive end, and they are indeed missing two of their three best players in terms of Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray. So, like,
yeah, their best and third best player.
Yeah. But I take I don't want to take this with a grain of salt or pour anything on Jordan Poole, because he did indeed start in game 3, and that's a tough game 3 on the road when you know Denver's going to throw everything they had at you to try to stay alive in this series. So I've been very impressed, especially when you know defenses are going to be focused on, you know, that Steph Curry is coming off the bench and Draymond is not exactly a scoring threat. Andrew Wiggins has fallen off somewhat since he started this season. So, like, defenses are coming at you, and Jordan Poole has still risen to the level. I don't know, though, and I will watch what happens going forward. To answer the first part now, how important is he? He's extremely important, because as now I think Steve Kerr is going to have a decision to make, and that is when Steph Curry comes into the starting lineup, are they going to stay small and start Jordan Poole alongside him? And I think he may very well do that. Know that people don't know to scout you, and your next matchup when you get past this is likely going to be Memphis. Is Jordan Poole going to be good? Because now Memphis is a good defensive team. Are you still going to be that guy? Can you still be that good? Because now you're going to be that third option for sure. And you're going to need to knock down shots and create your own now that the spotlight is on you against a good defensive team. He is going to be very important, because I thought the guy would be Andrew Wiggins. He's fallen off considerably. It is you now. Can you keep up that level? Can you sustain this level of play now that the level is going to get even tougher, because it's going to be Memphis? And after that, it's arguably going to be Phoenix. These are not bad defensive teams. These are teams with wing defenders that are very, very good. Like, you're going up against Desmond Bane and the other, I keep forgetting his name, the other wing defender over there in Memphis. And then after that, it is Jay Crowder and Mikal Bridges. Like, it does not get any easier going forward after that. He is going to be very important to their success, because we know what Clay brings. We know what Steph brings. I don't know what else to say, but I'll cap and say, I don't like young players in playoffs, but I like what Jordan Poole has been doing.
Listen, This is going to be a hot take, and I don't care because I mean it with all my heart. Let's talk about Jordan Poole. He's averaged 32 and a half minutes so far in this series through 3 games. Only one guy on the team has averaged more than him. That's Klay Thompson. He's at 34. He's averaging 66.7% shooting from the field. There's only one guy that's shooting. There's only two guys that's shooting better from the field than him. That's Gary Payton. He's shooting 75%, but he takes 3 shots a game. And Juan Toscano Anderson, because he takes 1 shot a game. So like that doesn't matter, right? 3-point percentage. Again, he's shooting 59% from 3. No one except for Gary Payton and Juan Toscano Anderson, who both average half of 3 a game, are shooting better from the 3-point than him. He's the best free throw shooter on the team at this point in the series, and he's leading the team in points, and I believe he's also leading the team, tied with Steph, leading the team in assists. Steph Curry, so far because of injury, has been coming off of the bench with a minutes restriction. Jordan Poole has been the best player on this basketball team through 3 games in this series, and it's not even close. He's been the best player in the series. We all know the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? There's this magical phrase that our guy Germ loves. It's called staggered minutes. Until it is proven that it doesn't work, have Steph continue to come off the bench and keep Jordan Poole in the starting lineup. There's no reason as of yet why that wouldn't be the appropriate game plan. Now, we know Steve Kerr. We know that Steve Kerr is obviously going to put Steph Curry in the starting lineup. We know that. Like, that's going to happen. But if you look, like, Jordan Poole's riding a wave of really good basketball. Like, he is playing phenomenal basketball right now so far through 3 games. He dropped, 39 points or something like that in game 1. He followed it up with another 29-point performance or something very close to it. Like, he's been playing really, really, really good basketball so far through 3 games. And I don't know, because of how young he is, Jordan Poole strikes me as a guy that it doesn't matter who you put on him. Like, it doesn't matter if it's Dillon Brooks or Desmond Bane in Memphis. It doesn't matter if it's Jay Crowder or Mikal Bridges out there in Phoenix. And that's no disrespect to those guys, because those guys are very solid wing defenders. But given the culture in Golden State and given how the leaps and bounds that Jordan Poole has taken in this career, like in this season, it's baffling to me that he didn't finish as a finalist for most improved, because he has clearly been one of the most improved players this season.
There was a spot in the season there he started to fall off towards the end, so I can understand why.
Okay, well, Ja missed games.
But
it's a fair point.
Ja was
it's a fair point, and I completely understand. I don't even remember. I think it's DeJounte Murray, Darius Garland, and Ja. I'm not going to say that Ja shouldn't be a finalist, because no one saw Memphis doing what they're doing. I'm hard pressed to think, and they had phenomenal seasons. I just don't know if DeJounte Murray or Darius Garland's seasons, as far as statistically and impact on their basketball team, was better than Jordan Poole's this season. When you consider the fact that the context and how Klay missed half of the season for the most part, and Jordan Poole had to step in and fill that void, and he did do that beautifully. I don't know. So what's done is done. But Jordan Poole has been the best player in this series. He's been the best player on the court for all 3 games, and I'll get to why that's unacceptable in just a second. But yeah, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Obviously, I think they will obviously put Steph Curry back in the starting lineup, most likely for the second round, once he is completely healthy and once he's completely off this minutes restriction. And then, like you said, do they keep Jordan Poole in the lineup? Do they put him back on the bench? If you do, you can put Jordan Poole on the bench and have him playing starter minutes. And I think that would probably be the best course of action, because what you don't want to happen is you don't want Jordan Poole to go from averaging 32 minutes a game to averaging 25. Like, it's not that big of a, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but 7 minutes gap as far as minute averages in the playoff series means a lot. So it'll be interesting to see how they do it. But Jordan Poole has undoubtedly been the best player in this series, and it takes a load off of Steph. It takes a load off of Klay, and I think obviously they've got one more guy that they can go to in big moments when the defense is obviously going to be honing a lot in on Steph and honing in a lot on Klay. So, like, this is beautiful all around. at the beginning of the season, I said the Warriors were going to win the finals. I said that we would get Suns and Warriors. The Warriors would win in 7. They'd go on to beat whoever it was on the Eastern Conference. Granted, things have changed, and I've since changed my pick to the Philadelphia 76ers because of what they've got out there with Embiid and Harden. But I do still have the Warriors coming out of the East, or out of the West. And the Devin Booker thing has nothing to do with it, because I think even with Devin Booker, the Warriors can outscore the Phoenix Suns, and that's the goal of the game, is to score more points than the opponent. And so even though the Suns are clearly the better defensive team, they're not as nearly as prolific offensively as the Warriors, and so that's where the gap goes. But Jordan Poole has been phenomenal. He has been, dare I say, the best player across. I think he's had the best performance across the league so far in the first round. Now, obviously, that remains to be seen because there's more games to be played. But if I had to pick my first round MVP right now, I'd say it's Jordan Poole.
It's fair.
Let's stay in this series for a second, and let's talk about your MVP, who is currently down 3-0. And I already know you've got some built-in argument with Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. not being there, but there's some precedent that has been set that I think we need to address, because Nikola Jokic is more than likely on the verge, a couple weeks away from being the 13th player in the history of basketball to receive back-to-back MVP honors. Giannis Antetokounmpo, your guy's on that list. Steph Curry's on that list. LeBron James is on that list twice. Michael Jordan's on that list. Larry Bird's on that list. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's on that list. Steve Nash is on that list. And there are a couple other guys on that list whose names I can't remember right now because I don't have them all written down. All of those guys are in the Hall of Fame. And the only 3 guys on that list that aren't in the Hall of Fame are LeBron, Steph, and Giannis. That's because they're still playing. But we all know that once they do retire, they will be going into the Hall of Fame first ballot, no doubt about it. This is an all-time great list here, and Nikola Jokic's name is about to be added to it. And Nikola Jokic hasn't really been playing like a back-to-back MVP. So, Justin, I have to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate Nikola Jokic's performance so far through 3 games against the Golden State Warriors?
I'd say 6.5 to 7. The raw numbers are there. I think he's averaging 29 points, 13 rebounds, and more than 5 assists per game. Those are very, very good numbers by themselves. The problem is, again, this is playoffs. You know you're without your 2 best players, not named yourself. So you're going to have to raise your level of play. And I thought he did that in game 3. Like, I don't know what more you could have asked of Nikola Jokic. I think he had, 38, 39 or something like that. And
he had 38 and 17.
Or 18 like that. Like, you can't ask much more of Nikola Jokic in that situation. The issue, I thought, the 2 games in Golden State, I agree that they are letting Draymond get away with a level of physicality that most players won't. But again, that is a former 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, and you're playing in Golden State, so that's to be expected. My problem, why I'm not giving Jokic what would amount to like an 8, 9, or 10, is because you have to punish them. Like, you got to punish somebody like Draymond. You got to punish the rest of those players, Kevon Looney and the rest, because you have a significant side advantage on them, and it's not good enough to say you're coming and setting up the offense, bringing the ball up the court, or starting your offense from so far, or just banging and not getting anywhere. You have to do more because your players are not around you. And I think games 1 and 2, for as decent as the stats were, I blame Jokic to a point, because you're just not punishing Draymond enough. Like, you're complaining to your refs. You just got to do more. And Nikola Jokic is not exactly that kind of guy, that punishing scorer that your guy you're going to bring up, Joel Embiid, is, or even Giannis. But you have to be in this situation without those 2 players. I am not going to blame Jokic primarily for what's going on in Denver, because the team is bad defensively. There's no getting around that. A lot of that is not his own fault. He is bad defensively too, but all of that is not his fault. And it is not his fault he's gone into a series without Jamal Murray, without Michael Porter Jr. You're just mismatched. That's the reality situation. You're playing against Steph, Draymond, Clay, no Jordan Poole all of a sudden, Andrew Wiggins. Like, you are mismatched. You're going to say you're the MVP, and this is what is asked of you, and that's why I like what he did in Game 3. So, but games 1 or 2, in my estimation, were not good enough. I will give him. That's why giving a 6.5, at the most a 7. Like, the performances aren't bad, but they're not good enough, especially when the teams are that much better. He had to pound away against Draymond. He had to punish them in the paint, and he's not done enough of that, in my estimation.
This is as expected. Justin Marvel has taken the team route. 100%. Makes sense. There's no Jamal Murray, who I think is the best player on this team. There's no Michael Porter Jr., who is, look, we can get into that another time, but Jamal Murray was the reason why the Nuggets were in those games. Jamal Murray was the sole reason why the Denver Nuggets were in the Western Conference Finals in the bubble. We can debate that another time, though. This is where I think we have to look at this relatively. We have to look at what we're understanding here, right? Because yes, we're not debating that Nikola Jokic is shorthanded going up against the Warriors, because he is, and there's nothing he can do about that. But there is a standard that is expected of a back-to-back MVP in a playoff series, right? And I think there is okay, when you look at what Kevin Durant, for example, did last season, you cannot, and Kevin Durant is a much more prolific scorer and a much more prolific offensive threat than Nikola Jokic. I got it, right? But Nikola Jokic, Kevin Durant essentially played the Milwaukee Bucks by himself, and Nikola Jokic, in every game of it looked like every game that Kevin Durant played was his last. And just when we thought he couldn't surpass what he did the game before, he did just that. I don't have to sit here and lament about what the greatest player in the history of the sport, LeBron James, has done countless times when he hasn't had support, or when he's been shorthanded, because we watched just a couple years ago LeBron James carry a very, very, very terrible Cavs team to the NBA Finals, right? I don't expect Nikola Jokic to have won a game in this series, because it's just too much. He can only do but so much. But there was a standard and expectation of play that Nikola Jokic really just hasn't met, as someone that is about to become the 14th player ever to be a back-to-back MVP. His game 3 was his best game of the series, and the numbers are great. Right, he's averaging 29 points a game. He's averaging upwards of 15 boards a game, I believe, or somewhere in that area. He's averaging about 6 or 7 assists a game. That's all beautiful, but he's not playing like an MVP right now. Like he those numbers he can put up in his sleep. We know that, but he's not playing like he's the best player on the team. He's being passive. He's doing a lot of complaining. He is not, as you said, making the Warriors pay. He's the tallest man on the floor. No matter who the Warriors can put on the lineup, as long as Nikola Jokic is on the floor, he's going to be the biggest guy on the court, and he's not playing like it. He is not playing like an MVP, and that's a problem. And that is something that we have to hold him to that standard. Like, and I said this about Kevin Durant the other day against the Celtics, and I say it all the time about LeBron James, because there's this smoke and mirrors double standard thing that we do. And I say it about Giannis too all the time, that we do sometimes, right? Like, this guy can have one bad game, and then this guy can have a bad game, but like this guy B is kind of given a pass when the situations were the exact same as the previous guy, right? Like, Nikola Jokic doesn't get a pass because he's shorthanded. You still have to play back. You still have to play like the most valuable player in the league, and he's not doing that. Granted, he's not the most valuable player in the league. That should be Joel Embiid, but he's going to win the award. Whatever. Voters fatigue my butt. Like, they use that excuse when they want to, and then whatever. Nikola Jokic, I think, is the second best player at his position. I think when it comes to all big men, he is the third best. He's the third best big man in the NBA today. I don't think that's an insult to say. What I do think, though, is quite insulting is that the soon-to-be 14th ever back-to-back MVP is seemingly laying down to the Golden State Warriors. Like, the numbers are there, but he's not playing with that, with the aggression that and the intention.
You have to give him game 3. I think
Game 3 was an A+ performance. He gave you almost 40 points. He gave you almost 20 boards. He played phenomenally. I think that was probably the best playoff game of his career. If not, it's up there as one of them. But games 1 and 2, I think, are what I'm really focusing on, because you're the underhanded team, that you don't have the home court advantage. You have to win one of those games, because okay, let's say you do go into Denver and let's say you do win a home game. Let's say they win on Sunday. You're still gonna go back to Golden State down. Like the game plan as a road team is to steal a game on the road in the first two. That's what you want to do. You want to go home with the series tied, and he didn't do that. And that's my thinking. That's where I'm really looking at Nikola Jokic, and I'm slightly disappointed, because that's the expectation. As the best player on the team, it is your job to hand deliver one of these road games to your team, right? We saw the Minnesota Timberwolves do it to the Memphis Grizzlies. We saw Jalen Brunson do it for the Mavericks. Even though they're the high seed. So then Donovan Mitchell do it for the Jazz. We saw Brandon Ingram just the other night do it for the Pelicans. Like we're seeing that's the goal. You have to win one of these games, and Nikola Jokic hasn't done it. And again, I understand that he's shorthanded, but games 1 and 2, I think, even though he put up the numbers, I don't want to say that those were empty stat games, because they weren't, because he did what he could, but he hasn't looked like. Game 3 was the first time he looked like the MVP of the season, and that's the issue. Is he hasn't looked like he's been the best player on the court. He didn't look like he was the best player in the league this season until game 3. And shorthanded or not, that's unacceptable in a playoff series when
I'll give you that. Like,
when the goal is to win this series. That's my only thing. I'm not expecting him to move heaven and earth and win this series, because that would be crazy, and I don't think he's going to. Now, if he had Jamal Murray or Michael Porter Jr., then we're talking about something completely different, as I said to you a couple months ago. But he doesn't have those guys. So the point is, just do what you can. And I don't feel like he hasn't performed to the best of his ability up until game 3. I'm not going to indict him for game 3. That was a great performance. It's game 1 and 2 where I'm looking at, and I'm like, because up until game 3, you can make a legitimate argument, not to sound like Nick right here. You can make a legitimate argument that there were at least 15 to 20 guys that played better through 2 games in their series than Nikola Jokic did. That's I don't think is becoming of a guy that's reigning MVP, soon to be back-to-back MVP. That's my only issue with what we've seen from Jokic so far.
Again, that's why he didn't give him a pass. Like game 1 and games 2, I thought, quite frankly, he was not aggressive enough. He didn't impose his will enough. I think I'm not going to give him a pass. I will say this. I knew Aaron Gordon is vastly overpaid, and we're seeing it now, because without
absolutely
Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray, as much as I agree Nikola Jokic should be raising his level of game, so too should Aaron Gordon. And what you're doing is just really not good enough. Like, quite frankly, in comparison to what the money you're making, like, good gosh, like, I understand you had to overpay to get him, but no, like, and quite frankly, Denver didn't give him that contract. It was Orlando. Still, though, like, no, like, these guys are gone. You could argue Jokic's numbers really haven't moved, so really you should be the guy to raise your level of play. But I agree with you, like, games 1 and games 2 were not a good look for Jokic in terms of not being able to, dominate or, establish, like, impose your will on the Golden State Warriors.
One last thing, or one last topic of the show before we go. Speaking of imposing your will, the Boston Celtics have absolutely just owned the Brooklyn Nets so far through 2 games. They lead 2-0. They've made KD and Kyrie look really, really bad. Although KD did score 27 points last night, 17 of those points were from the free throw line. He only had 4 field goals made from the field, and he had 6 turnovers. So they've been really, 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 really scrappy. Ben Simmons is supposed to be back, for whatever that's worth, by game 4. So Brooklyn does still have 1 game to play at home before the imminent return of Ben Simmons, barring any setbacks. We all know how that goes, right? So another 2-part question here. We'll go one at a time. First of all, can the Nets win game 3 at home without Ben Simmons?
Yeah, because realistically, they should have won game 1. Like, Kyrie Irving went off. Like, that was the Kyrie Irving I expected, because for whatever criticism leveled at him, and I am one of those people who has some problems, because I don't think he impacts winning as he should. Like, game 1 was it. And I'm not going to rip on KD. Probably shouldn't, but were KD had KD just hit a couple shots in game one, or just not fall asleep on that defensive possession to end the game, where he's caught ball watching, Jason Tatum backdoors in and gets a game-winning layup. We're talking about a completely different scenario here. Like, so I say that to say, had they gotten a competent game, KD in game one, this series is tight. And then on top of that, Boston has a 17-point lead in game two. With their two stars looking terrible, KD once again had no field goals at all in the second half of game two. And they lose that as well. Like, everything tells me the Brooklyn Nets can win a game in this series. And the reality of the situation, a couple plays here or there, we're talking about a series tied going into Brooklyn. So to answer your question, like, yeah, yes, Brooklyn can win game three. It's just that whether it's injury, whether it is no Father Time catching up, or whether it is Boston now completely owning Kevin Durant looks absolutely atrocious. Like, and it is one of the criticisms I've had of him from all this time dating back to OKC. Kevin Durant does not like when it gets overly physical, and it is clear that that is what Boston has come out to do. Like, they are going to body him at every point. He's always had problems with physical defenders in terms of getting open. Like, Kevin Durant, for as tall he has always had problems getting free to get the basketball. But this looks terrible. Kevin Durant has had problems in this series getting free. Kevin Durant has not gotten below the free throw line, or hardly gotten below the free throw line in this series. Like, he is struggling with the physicality that Boston has given him, and they need Kevin Durant to get back to at least, I don't know, look like a semblance of a good player, or not. This series is going to be a wash. But to answer your question, yeah, Brooklyn can win a game, or they can win game three.
I think, well, obviously it's a must-win game. If they lose, the series is over because it'd be 3-0. I'm hard-pressed to think Brooklyn doesn't win game three. This series, though, is looking... It's getting the 2018 finals feel. I believe I have my years correct, right? If you remember back to that finals, there was the blunder with J.R. Smith at the end of regulation where the Cavs almost won that game, and then the Warriors just completely owned them. I think that was the year that they 2017, whatever year it was when the Warriors swept LeBron and the Cavs in the finals.
Right. Yeah, 2018.
Like whatever year that was, that's what this is starting to look like, because you look back to that series, right? They have a close game, and then the J.R. Smith blunder with the free throw and the clock, and then the Warriors win that game, and it's pretty much just it's done from there. That's what this series is starting to feel like, right? You have that close game, and it's just that one lapse at the very end where Jason Tatum hits the game winner, the game-winning layup. And it's not looking good for Brooklyn. I think Brooklyn will win game three. Game four is irrelevant at this point. Like I feel, maybe I'm wrong, a part of me feels like the Nets were game planning for Ben Simmons' return. And I think that you can make the strong argument that by hedging their bet on when Ben would return, they lost sight of the task ahead of them, which was to win these games they have in front of them. I'm not saying that that's 100% true. It's just what it feels like. And I think at this point now, given that Ben is coming back in game four, not only can you not lose game three because you'll be down 3-0, but losing game three makes Ben Simmons mean absolutely nothing. And I've already said on the show last week that Ben Simmons' return doesn't tip the scales in Brooklyn's favor anyway, because he's not a threat offensively. But he is a help defensively, but that's it. He is by default their best defender. But when you have Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and you've got Pritchard, and you've got the defensive player of the year, Marcus Smart, and you've got Al Horford and Daniel Tice, and you have all these bodies, regardless of how lethal or not you think some of these guys are defensively, there's still bodies that you can throw at a Kevin Durant and at a Kyrie Irving. And given that Seth Curry has kind of been off, given that Patty Mills hasn't been consistent, Bruce Brown played phenomenally last night, but it wasn't enough. Like, given that the others on this team, and Jerm talked about this last week as far as depth, given that the others are on this team aren't really rising to the occasion and being consistently at their best, it's making it really easy pickings for the Boston Celtics as far as being able to just attack KD and Kyrie, because all they're doing is daring Patty Mills to make a shot. They're daring Seth Curry to make a shot. They're daring these other guys to make a shot, and they're just not doing it. If I'm not mistaken, Bruce Brown had 23 points last night in game 2, and that was great. But when you combine that with KD going 4 for 20 something, including 0 of 10 from the field in the fourth, when you combine that with Kyrie Irving also doing that, well, that's not good. We talk about all-time terrible shooting nights. This is the first time as a duo that both KD and Kyrie, as a duo, neither one of those guys shot over 33% from the field. I think Kyrie shot 31% and KD shot 24 or 27%, something like that. That's not winning basketball, because JT and Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown through 2 games have consistently made it a point to flip that switch, as I was talking about earlier, in the fourth quarter, and they've done it beautifully. I mean, the Nets have gotten out to comfortable leads, but when the going gets tough, the Celtics just play really great defense, and they swarm the ball, and that's clearly caused the undoing of the Brooklyn Nets so far through 2 games. And like I said earlier, this is really just feeling like that final series between the Warriors and the Cavs. The Nets had that one shot in game 1, and it slipped through their fingers, and it doesn't look like they've recovered from it. All props to the Celtics, though, because the game plan has been perfect. They have played perfect basketball from a schematic standpoint and from an execution standpoint as far as game planning against the Brooklyn Nets. But Ben Simmons returning means nothing. And I said it last week, it wouldn't have meant anything anyway, but now it really means nothing, because, like I said, I feel like maybe not the players, but the coaching staff anyway, it feels like they hedged their bet on when Ben would return and tried to play it that way, and was like, if we can just get one. And they had their one in game 1, and they missed it. And now, because they missed it in game 1, and Boston came out just in the second half and was really determined to take the 2-0 lead, and now they have it, Ben Simmons' return could mean absolutely nothing. Because let's say Brooklyn does win game 3. You would still have to win game 4 to make this series actually interesting and actually mean something. You can't go back to Boston down 3-1 if you win game 3. You can't do that. It's getting dicey in Brooklyn. And I thought that with KD and Kyrie both being there, it would help them get there in 7, because they're both prolific scorers. But maybe that's my fault. I wasn't underestimating the Celtics, but I didn't think KD and Kyrie would look this helpless against Boston's defense, and they have looked, quite frankly, helpless against Boston's defense. And they're gonna have to figure something out in Brooklyn. I don't know.
I'll say this, right? I think, to allude to your problem with the game plan, I think Steve Nash has been badly coached. I have my issues with him getting the job, not because I don't like Steve Nash, because obviously, as a Suns fan, he's an all-time legend. But I don't think he earned the job the right way, like everyone else has had to go through assistant coaching ranks and prove themselves, blah, blah, blah. But that's another topic of conversation for another day. I think the problem is twofold. One, they, like everyone else, me included, they feel like KD could go there and just drop 40 a game, because he was doing it during the regular season when healthy.
Yep.
And they didn't kind of, I don't know, game plan or expect Boston's physicality on defense. And that's clearly been a problem. But I think here's where Ben kind of helps. And I'm not saying Ben is going to tilt the series, because like you, I don't think so. But here's where Ben helps on 2 sides. One, you've heard me talk about this, why I never had Brooklyn as a legit threat. It's because Brooklyn has too many pieces that are defensive liabilities, are not just defensive liabilities, but small players. You've heard me say Kyrie Irving is a small defensive liability. You've heard me say Seth Curry and Patty Mills and Goran Dragic. And the issue is like these players, because of how Brooklyn is constituted, they have to get significant minutes. So while I'm not a fan of Boston's offense, they can headhunt these players. Like, okay, we're going to go after Seth Curry. You want to play him big minutes? No problem. We are going to target him. You want to do the same with Goran Dragic and Patty Mills? No problem. We're going to score at them on the other end. So with Ben Simmons on the floor, we know the defensive player he is, and he is an extremely elite one who can likely guard all 5 positions. That kind of helps in that regard. Is one less player Boston can legitimately attack and go after, because, quite frankly, Ben Simmons can guard anyone on that Boston line, and quite effectively too. The real issue, I think, where Ben helps is the opposite end of the floor, which sounds funny. You are asking Kyrie Irving to do what he is not. Kyrie Irving is not a facilitator. He can do it, but his primary function, his will is to score the basketball. And we saw in game 2 when, for whatever reason, Steve Nash asked him not to be as aggressive. You saw what that looked like. It has become a bunch of isolation basketball in Brooklyn, and that is not working. I thought that would be what Boston is, because Boston has that issue. Boston really doesn't have a playmaker outside of Marcus Smart. So quite often you see Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown going one-on-one and ISO ball. But that is what Brooklyn has degenerated into, just a bunch of isolation basketball. And it has hurt Kevin Durant primarily, because he's not getting easy touches. He's not getting easy looks. Hopefully, Ben Simmons can help in that regard, because if there is one thing Ben Simmons can do is pass the basketball. He's not great in half-court situations because teams don't have to play him as an offensive threat, because he's not going to shoot. He's not even much of a threat to attack you off the dribble and go after the basket. So teams can play him like they do with Draymond Green and back off. But still, you can at least start the ball with Ben Simmons, and you can run some picks off the ball for Kevin Durant and can get the ball there timely, and hopefully that allows Kevin Durant not to have to go isolate and go one-on-one with defensive loaded up, and maybe that helps Kevin Durant in that situation. So I can see that Ben Simmons will help in some regard on both ends of the floor, but I agree with your greater point. I don't believe Ben Simmons is coming to tilt the scales in Brooklyn's favor. I think, for whatever it's worth, Steve Nash has to stop this ISO-heavy offense that's going on in Brooklyn, and Kevin Durant has got to toughen up and learn to play with the physicality.
Real quick before we go, we've got 3 games tonight. Heat at Hawks, Bucks at Bulls, Suns at Pelicans. Do the Heat take the 3-0 commanding lead, or do the Hawks finally get their first win of the series?
I think
I'm
going to bet, like, there was a stat out there. I think the Hawks closed out the regular season something like 20-something and 3 at home going like in the regular season. Trae Young is really, really, really good. So I am going to say and lean towards the Hawks winning game 3. They're going to either win game 3 or game 4, because they really are good at home. So I'm going to say the Hawks. But I think that's the only game they win the series. What the other 2 games?
DeMar DeRozan dropped 41 last night, tying the series up with the Bucks 1-1. They go back home to host the Bucks without Khris Middleton for the first time. Do the Bulls make it 1 in a row, or do the Bucks get a win back and make the series 2-1?
2-1 to the Bucks, and not because I live here in Wisconsin, but the reality is
absolutely because you live there in Wisconsin.
Let's be serious. Like we talked about it, this stat. Chicago has not beaten a top 4 or 5 seed the entire season before game 2, and it still took every part of DeRozan scoring 41 points to hold off Milwaukee, although Khris Middleton left that game early with injury. I think Giannis and the Bucks were absolutely bad defensively on the perimeter and in transition. I do not think Milwaukee makes that same mistake. I think when you beat a team so often, I think Milwaukee's like, all right, we're just going to turn up and beat these guys. So I think the focus comes back. Giannis goes off. Jrue Holiday wakes up for whatever slumber he's in, and I think Milwaukee wins this game handily.
Lastly, but not least, I don't feel like I have to ask you this question because you've got the jersey on. But for the sake of the show, I'll ask you anyway. The Suns go to New Orleans to take on the Pelicans. Brandon Ingram dropped, I believe, 37, 9, and 11 in Game 2 to take to make the series 1-1. First game without Devin Booker. Can the Suns make it 2-1, or will Brandon Ingram continue to stay hot and take a 2-1 lead in New Orleans?
I love Brandon Ingram as a player, not just because I support Duke, but I love a player that does everything. He is a scorer, he rebounds, and he is a facilitator. I love Brandon Ingram, the player. But again, it took all of that just to get past Phoenix without Devin Booker in the second half. It took Phoenix playing absolutely no perimeter defense and transition defense and Brandon Ingram's best playoff game ever for them to win the game. I think Monty Williams gets into Phoenix. I think forget what they do offensively. I think the focus, the goal will be you'll see a better defensive performance. I don't think Chris Paul is going to have that blast of a game again. And I'm not saying this as a Phoenix Suns fan. I'm saying this is a team who threatened Golden State's all-time winning road record this season before they took the foot off the gas to end the season. This is an elite road team. I think you're going to see the defensive focus again. I don't think Mikal Bridges and Jay Crowder will be that bad defensively again. I think the Suns pull it out because of their defense and not offense, because clearly they're going to be missing Devin Booker.
And of course, no one in America is surprised that you picked the Bucks and the Suns to win their games
No
tonight.
one.
I've got Heat, Bucks, and Suns winning tonight. Heat take a 3-0 commanding lead. Both Suns and Bucks take a momentum changing 2-1 lead. A couple things before we go. First, Justin, please tell everybody where they can find you and what's up next for you and your show.
Put the hashtag in front of the This Justin people because you do not want to be taken to Max Kellerman's show if you want. All right, I'm not here to bash anyone. Just hashtag This Justin. We are on most socials. We are not your traditional podcast, so you're not going to find us on iTunes or Spotify. You will find us every Monday night at 7 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central on YouTube. So every Monday night, you'll find us there. This Monday night, we have a special episode with one of Dwayne Marcus's, I will say Twitter.
Soon to be. We'll get there. We'll get there. Smalls, if you're watching this, look, just come on the show. We'll get there.
Yes, Stephanie Smalls. Marsha makes her long-awaited return. That's Marsha Boyce, our host. And a lady she works with on another podcast, Rashika Grant. It is an all-female episode this Monday. So do not miss it. And they are going to talk about primarily women in sports from the perspective of media, perspective of games, perspective of athletes, everything. Like, does the sporting world devalue women in sports? Tune in Monday night to hear the perspective of three very knowledgeable and worthy women in sports.
Justin intentionally canceled the show that I was supposed to host because he knew that I'd do a better job of him at it. So whatever, at some point down the line, that'll come again, and trust me, it'll be the greatest episode of this Justin ever. A couple things to talk about before we go. As always, thank you guys for watching, or if you're listening to this on Saturday, thank you guys for listening. Be sure to click the like button and the subscription button and the notification bell so you don't miss any new episodes. Could you all do me a favor as well? Head over to Instagram and TikTok and Twitter. Follow me at Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at GTP Marcus. Also, while you're on Instagram and TikTok, follow at Connell Jr. Couture's my friend Barry Guido Connell. He has his own clothing brand. It's really dope stuff. And also, last but not least, a foundation that I was blessed to be a part of in high school as far as getting me to college, the College Girl Foundation. That's girl with a U, not an I. They're having their annual scholarship luncheon for the first time in 2 years in person on June 4th, 2022, from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. at the Hamilton Live on 14th Street Northwest. It would mean a lot to me, and I'm sure to the president, founder, and CEO of the foundation, Miss Jessica Brown, if you would donate and or buy a ticket to be there. You can follow her at College Girl Foundation. That's girl with a U, not an I, and College Girl JB, again, girl with a U, not an I, on Instagram. And you can click the link in our bio for all the information to purchase a ticket or donate. It's a really dope foundation. and it's helping kids get to college. And that's what the world's about nowadays, apparently. So you should go do that. Last but not least, my birthday's at the end of the month. We're coming up on it. It's in about 4 weeks. And as I've been saying on every show I've been on for the past 6 weeks, we're sitting at just under 90 subscribers. And I would greatly appreciate it if within the next 4 weeks, we can get that number from 86, I believe it is now, to 100 subscribers on YouTube. That would mean a lot to me. So please, 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 please click the subscribe button on this video and on the channel so you don't miss any new episodes. Thank you guys for watching and listening. If you're listening on Spotify or podcast, we'll be right back here very soon because just like last year, we are going to do series recaps at the end of these series. And some of these series are coming to a close as we continue on the road to crown a champion in the 2022 NBA season. So for Justin Marvel of the hashtag This Just In Sports Show, this is Marcus of Go Talk with Marcus signing off. Thank you guys for watching and listening. And always enjoy the rest of your lives.